Today, we're jumping into one of the most wild, contradictory, and flat out explosive periods in American history, the Gilded Age. We're talking about the time roughly between the end of the Civil War and the start of the 1900s, when America went through a change so huge, it really did reshape the world. And the name itself is the whole key to understanding this era. Notice it wasn't the Golden Age, it was the Gilded Age. And that word, gilded, it means something is covered with a super thin layer of gold. It looks beautiful and valuable on the outside, but underneath, it's hiding something much less perfect. And believe me, that surface was incredibly shiny. I mean, this was an age of absolutely mind-blowing industrial growth. You had new technologies that seemed like magic, and people were building personal fortunes on a scale nobody had ever seen before. It really felt like America was just this unstoppable machine of progress. But that's just the gold paint, right? Because underneath all that shine, you had these massive economic gaps that were basically tearing the country into two different Americas. Political corruption was everywhere, and some really serious social problems were just boiling right below the surface. This was the great paradox of the time, the incredible shine and the deep, dark shadow, living side by side. So let's do it. Let's peel back that thin layer of gold. Because to really get what the Gilded Age was all about, we have to look at what created both the incredible wealth and the deep-seated problems that came right along with it. Okay, so where did all this change and all this tension actually come from? Well, it was really powered by two massive engines. First, revolutionary new technology, and second, completely new ways of building a business. The speed of innovation back then was just staggering. And if you had to pick one person who embodies that technological surge, it's got to be Thomas Edison. I mean, yeah, we all think of the light bulb, but it was so much more than that. The guy also pioneered things like the phonograph and motion pictures. He was literally creating entire industries out of thin air. And just think for a second about how one single invention could totally rewire society. The light bulb didn't just light up a room. It let factories run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All of a sudden, making stuff wasn't limited by when the sun was up. This directly created the idea of modern shift work and completely changed the rhythm of industrial life forever. Now, alongside all this new tech, you had these new business strategies. The first one was called horizontal integration. And this was a pretty ruthless approach that was perfected by John D. Rockefeller. See, the goal here wasn't just to compete with other companies. The goal was to eliminate the competition completely by either buying them out or just crushing them, to control one specific part of an industry. For him, that was oil refining. And just look at the results. I mean, wow. By the end of this process, Standard Oil controlled about 90% of all the oil refining in the entire country. That's not just having a big market share, that is basically owning the whole infrastructure of an entire industry. It's just total domination. The other big strategy was actually the complete opposite. It was called vertical integration. This was championed by Andrew Carnegie in the steel business, and his idea was all about controlling the entire supply chain. We're talking from the mines where you dig up the iron ore, to the ships and railroads that move it, all the way to the giant mills that crank out the final steel beams. The big advantage here? Insane efficiency and total control over your costs. But look, these incredibly powerful business models, they couldn't have just popped up in a vacuum. They were fueled by a powerful set of ideas and a political climate that didn't just allow for this massive consolidation of wealth, it actively encouraged it. The main attitude in government at the time was something called laissez-faire, which is just French for let it be. And the core idea was simple. The economy works best when you just leave it alone. No government interference, no heavy-handed regulations, just hands off. And this hands-off approach got a really powerful intellectual defense from a theory called social Darwinism. It basically took Darwin's idea of survival of the fittest from nature and twisted it to apply to society and the economy. The argument went that competition was just a natural process. So if you were rich and successful, that was proof you were fitter. And if you were poor, well, that was seen as a personal, natural failing. So you've got this mix of ruthless business tactics and a hands-off ideology. And yeah, it created a ton of wealth, but it all came at a staggering human cost. So now we need to flip the coin and look at the real price of all this progress, the deep social divisions it cut right through the heart of the nation. For the huge workforce that actually powered this whole industrial engine, immigrants, women, even children, the reality was pretty grim. We're talking 10 to 12-hour days, 6, sometimes 7 days a week. The working conditions were often incredibly dangerous and totally unregulated, and the pay was low. And for women and kids, it was just a tiny fraction of what men earned for doing the exact same job. Eventually, the problems just got too big and too obvious to sweep under the rug. Public anger really started to build over the power of these giant monopolies and over railroads that were charging farmers unfair rates. The pressure on the government to finally step in and do something became huge. And all that pressure led to a really historic moment in 1887. The federal government stepped in and created the Interstate Commerce Commission, or the ICC. And this was a massive deal because it was the very first federal agency ever created to regulate private business. Now, let's be clear, its powers at the beginning were pretty limited, but symbolically, this was a huge shift. It was the government basically admitting for the first time that completely unregulated capitalism could be dangerous. It was the first real crack in that hands-off, laissez-faire way of thinking. So all of this brings us to the big central debate of the era, a question that kind of shows you just how morally confused people were about what was happening. How do we look back at the men at the top of these gigantic empires? Were they heroes or were they villains? You really had two completely different stories. On one hand, you could see them as captains of industry, these brilliant visionaries who built the nation, pushed progress forward, and created incredible efficiency. But on the other hand, you could see them as robber barons, ruthless monopolists who exploited their workers, used dirty tricks to crush their rivals, and manipulated markets just to get richer. Andrew Carnegie, maybe, more than anyone else, was the walking embodiment of this whole contradiction. And he tried to square the circle in his famous essay, The Gospel of Wealth. In it, he actually argued that super rich people had a deep moral duty to give all their money away for the public good before they died. And he really did put his money where his mouth was. The guy gave away over $350 million. I mean, that's an almost unimaginable amount of money back then. He used it to fund thousands of public libraries, universities, and concert halls. He saw himself as a steward, a trustee of his wealth for the good of the people. And this, right here, is why the Gilded Age still matters so much today. Its core tension, that big fight between the power of free markets and the need for some kind of regulation, that debate never, ever went away. I mean, think about Carnegie's vertical integration model. Doesn't that sound an awful lot like some modern tech companies that control their entire ecosystem, from the phone in your hand to the app store you use? Which leaves us with a question that is just as relevant now as it was back in 1890. Even if a company is incredibly efficient and gives us great products, at what point does that efficiency become a danger to fair competition? At what point does that power become too much?